Right at the curb.
Are we ready to record in the back? We're gonna hope so. Good evening. This is a public hearing of the Zoning Board of Appeals of the City of Evanston. The zoning ordinance empowers this board to hear references from the City Council, applications for variances and special uses, and appeals from decisions of the zoning administrator. Depending on the type of matter, we will either make a final determination or send a recommendation to the City Council. Present here tonight are board members Mary Beth Burns, Scott Gingold, Beth McLennan, Matthew Rogers, and Andrew Gallimore. I'm Lori Summers, the current chair, and we therefore have a quorum. Also present from city staff is Melissa Klotz. This is a formal hearing and we have rules that govern our proceedings. Our most important rule is that only one person may speak at a time without interruption. It is not just civility, but it is necessary to accurately record our proceedings. Anyone who wishes to address the board regarding any matter on the agenda will have an opportunity to do so at the appropriate time. Our normal procedure is to hear first from the staff on the documents in the file. We would then receive testimony and other evidence from the applicant or appellant. After the applicant or appellant has completed their initial submission, any person who has a legal interest in real property located within 500 feet of the property that is the subject of the application or appeal may then present evidence, reasonably question witnesses, or seek a continuance of the hearing. Next, others who wish to make a statement regarding the matter may do so at that time. When all opposing testimony and other statements have been received, the applicant or appellant will be given an opportunity for rebuttal or a closing statement. Board members may ask questions of anyone offering testimony or statements at any time. All testimony and statements will be under oath. Although we do not apply the strict rules of evidence, we ask that you limit your testimony or statement to your own personal knowledge. When you testify or make a statement, please tell us your name and address, and be sure that you have printed your name on the pad provided outside. Because we do not have a court reporter, it is imperative that you speak at a microphone so that your testimony or statement will be recorded. We are audio and video recorded in this room. When all the testimony, other evidence, and statements have been received, we will close the record and begin our deliberations. Our first item on the agenda is related to the meeting minutes of the June 19th meeting. Were there any comments on
Is the vote right?
The vote is not correct. The vote should be 5-1.
Hi, Mary Beth.
Hi, Mary Beth.
Were there any other comments with respect to the notes?
I would move that we, with that one correction, approve the minutes of our meeting for June 19th, 2012.
Second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion is carried. And those minutes are approved. Just in order of business, jumping ahead to actually the second item on our agenda this evening for 2408 Hartzell Street. I believe we have an email in our packet from the architect requesting on behalf of the applicant for a continuance for the project to our August 7th meeting. Has there been any other correspondence related to that?
No, there has not. The applicant felt that they wanted to have some of the interior details worked out before proceeding with the zoning board.
Okay. Was there anyone who came tonight to speak to us regarding that project? Okay, seeing none, is there any discussion or motion regarding the request for continuance?
I would move in the matter of ZBA 12 ZMJV 0050 for 2408 Hartzell Street, that we continue that to our next regularly scheduled meeting, which will be Tuesday, August 7th.
Been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion is carried unanimously, so we will continue 2408 Hartsel Street to our next regularly scheduled meeting of August 7th, which does bring to note the fact that what would normally be our next regularly scheduled meeting of July 24th has been canceled due to lack of cases. And that brings us back to 1004 Greenwood Street. And before we read that into the record, I believe Mr. Rogers has a statement.
Yes, I just want to state for the record that I have a relationship with Ms. Kettlecamp. She is currently doing the work for our condo association, and I, as president, am the one who has authorized that work. So in the interest of not prejudicing anything, I will be recusing myself from this case.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to say something before we continue on that case? Okay, seeing none, Melissa, could you read into the record?
Claire Kettlecamp, architect for St. Paul's Lutheran Church, applies for major zoning relief to construct a front entrance terrace and handicap-accessible ramp yard obstruction at St. Paul's Lutheran Church. The applicant requests a front yard setback of 14.5 feet, where 24.3 feet is required, zoning code section 6419B1. The Zoning Board of Appeals is the determining body for this case. Submitted by the applicant as documents placed on file is the variance application submitted June 6, 2012, standards form, zoning analysis, certificate of appropriateness, plat of survey dated May 10, 2011, proposed site plan and drawings, elevations, image of property, aerial view of property, and Spark meeting minutes from June 27, 2012.
Thank you. At this time, if I could swear in anyone who wishes to speak with us regarding this matter. If you could raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth throughout the course of these proceedings?
I do.
Thank you. If you could come to the microphone and adjust as necessary if you need, and tell us your name and address, please.
My name is Nancy Hoffman. I live at 18 Salem Lane, Evanston, 60203.
And I'm sorry, Ms. Hoffman, I don't see you in the packet for reference, so if you could just clarify your relationship
I
to the
am a
project.
member of St. Paul's Lutheran
Okay.
Church and part of the committee that is overseeing this project.
Okay, great. Could you describe the project then?
We are building a ramp and a raised terrace to make our church handicapped accessible. Currently, the sanctuary can only be accessed by, I forget how many steps. What we want to do is build a ramp to a small gathering area just outside the door that's on level with the narthex. It's been designed to be as unobtrusive to the neighbors as possible. One thing that is not in your packet, in terms of the impact to neighboring properties, the lot directly to the west is a full lot that we own that is, it's just an open lot. So I think it, in terms of the setback affecting our neighbors, it's quite far removed from the next house.
Have you spoken with the owners of the next house about the project?
We have not.
Honestly, for a while, I thought the church owned the next house, but you guys don't own the next house, the White House.
The White House, no.
Oh.
We did at one point,
Oh,
many,
okay.
many years ago.
Did you consider any designs that put the ramp on the east side of the building?
We did. The property slopes up from east to west, and so we did have a design that built the ramp from the east, from Maple Street. It requires a longer ramp and a steeper grade. We looked at using there's a side door as an entrance. A ramp to that door requires some kind of doubling back. One of our design criteria, and something that is important to us, is that we want all people to be able to access the sanctuary through the same entryway. We did not want to have a handicapped accessible entry that was different than the way everybody else comes into the sanctuary. The other consideration with coming off of Maple Street, that doorway comes into a very narrow hallway that's really not suitable as a handicapped accessible entryway.
What makes it not suitable?
The hallway?
Yes.
It's narrow, and there's a door that isn't wide enough at the end of, so there's the door to the street, and then there's steps going up to the balcony and a sort of coat rack area. But it's a very narrow hallway. It goes to there's a door to the narthex that would have to be enlarged to make it handicapped accessible. The bigger problem is that there's not enough room on that side of the building to build the ramp.
Meaning you'd be asking for a variance if you put it on that side as well?
Yes. In fact, that doorway is already over the setback requirement.
How far is that from the property line, that doorway?
From the property line, I don't know.
I think that's on the plat.
The plat of survey shows that it's 17.4 feet from that side property line, and the required setback would be 15 feet, so the building is conforming, but if there was a ramp on there, it would require a variance.
But it would encroach less than the front yard ramp is being proposed to do.
From a percentage, yes.
Because the ramp is one of those approved yard encroachments, right? Which is 10%.
Right, so it would get a 10% credit.
So it gets a 1.7 foot.
It would get a 1.5 foot since the required setback is 15 feet.
Okay. Okay. And it's 2 feet back, so that's 3. Okay. But with the switchback, it would be 6 feet. It would be a 6 foot wide ramp. So at 17 feet minus 6 is 13. And what are we saying? Is it from the Greenwood side? It's 11? Oh, yeah, sorry. I really shouldn't do math in my head. And what's it from the Greenwood side? Do you know?
They're asking for 14 and a half feet.
The 14 and a half feet is to the terrace. So the ramp is actually back probably another 4 feet, I would guess. Well, it does have a portion that sticks out almost to that 17.5 as well.
Is the terrace entirely new as well, or is there something there now?
That's entirely new. That's sidewalk right now.
So did you consider any designs that put a ramp in the front but didn't have a terrace, so that the ramp would be going up to the existing entryway?
The existing entryway is just steps. There's no landing at all. So whatever we do requires putting in a landing. We've got to extend the area from at the level of the floor of the narthex out.
That right there is a picture of the front, right, as it exists now with the railing in the center? The second picture down on the left?
Right.
And actually, just to note for the record, there's a board that has 7 images on it that we'll call applicant's Exhibit A. And I generally appreciate the fact that there's opportunity here to locate the ramp in a way that with vegetation, I think it'll be far less obtrusive than it could be from like a straight out condition. I think that kind of coming straight out towards any of the sidewalks would be far more obtrusive to the view and to the general kind of front yard character of the street there, where it is kind of flat, because you would automatically be bringing that structure kind of down, and they would plant around it, so you would lose sort of that somewhat front yard feel that this opportunity gives you, which makes it a little bit more consistent with the large, while still a smaller yard, makes it more consistent with the larger front yards that the rest of the street has. One kind of semi-technical question I did have, just because of reading your notes and kind of the intentions that you were going for, and always wanting to make sure that we're understanding the final design of something that we're looking at, there was a note about how the existing stair has a rail that comes down the center of it, and you guys were trying to eliminate that. However, it seemed like the proposed set of stairs were wider than what would, I'm not sure how to phrase this. If you need the entire width of the existing set of stairs for egress, then you would have to have a center rail in there. And I'm not sure if that has been actually reviewed, if that has been reviewed at that level of technicality or reviewed with the building department, because that could alter the design, I guess, is where I'm going with that.
If the biggest issue we have with the railing is that we have to remove the railing to bring a casket into the church.
Right.
With this ramp, the casket would come up the ramp, so even if we needed a railing on the stairs, we wouldn't have that issue.
Okay.
And that is an additional consideration with the terrace space, is it gives us, we took into consideration the turning radius of a casket coming up that ramp. So if we needed a railing in the middle of those steps, it would not pose the same problem as the current configuration does.
Okay.
I'm looking at drawing L2. The structure that you're proposing to add puts about 12 additional feet of structure onto the front of the building, and I'm just wondering whether you considered it as any designs where the entry terrace was not necessarily so deep, and maybe ran parallel with the ramp itself on the front side.
We did. We looked at a lot of different configurations and different approaches to solve this particular problem. One of our goals is to create a space for gathering where everybody can gather. It is our practice as a congregation. People come out of the church and they tend to stop and gather in front of the church. One of the considerations is that for people who need to use the ramp, we wanted to create a gathering space that was on the level of the church so that everybody could access it equally.
Isn't that the church itself the gathering space?
We have a very small narthex. It's really not very conducive to people gathering. Certainly in the winter people do, but we feel that it's important to our congregation to have that space and to make it available to everybody. And that's why we designed it the way we did.
Can I go back to the interesting part for me, which is the turning radius of a casket?
Uh-huh.
What is the turning radius of a casket?
I don't
no?
know. No.
Architect's not here?
I don't think a casket has a turning radius the way that a car or a semi-truck does.
No, I understand, but it needs a certain amount of space, so
Right.
I mean, that's a practical consideration here that seems to have some bearing.
Right, so the
Sorry, I'm going to be a pain,
Yeah.
but we do need to get you recorded. So if I can get you to a microphone and get you sworn in and get your name and everything. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth throughout the course of these proceedings? I do. Thank you. And if you could give us your name and then answer it.
It's Claire Kettlecamp. So one of the questions was the width of the stairs, that they're a little wider than the existing ones, and actually they aren't. They're the same width as the alcove where the door is recessed. So we've brought that out, and the terrace is only 6 feet deep, and so I've got about a foot on either side of the ramp, which is 4 feet for the handicap access. So we have just a little elbow room, so once we get the casket up, there's room to maneuver it and turn it 90
Right.
degrees to enter the church.
Okay.
So, and I suppose if, you need a 3-point turn, there's a little room for that as well.
It might not be appropriate. Okay.
And wheelchairs, that's true. The same consideration for wheelchairs.
And just to be clear, I'm guessing, there's no way to enter the church from the west side?
The west, there's no door except at the back of the chapel. It's a different chapel. It accesses a chapel in the far south end.
There's not a door to the main there's not a door to the
Sanctuary.
The sanctuary
Okay.
from the west side of it.
Okay.
From the west side of it, yes.
Is there a practical reason why the concrete entry terrace needs to be 6 feet wide or deep?
I was just giving it a foot on either side of the ramp, just for the turning aspect, whether it's a wheelchair or a casket, just a little extra room.
Any other questions at this moment?
Could the front of the ramp, or could the ramp be moved the 1.5 feet or 2 feet to the south, and the front of the concrete entry terrace narrowed a bit?
And
Are you saying put the ramp right up against the wall? The exterior wall of the church?
I'm saying move it 2 feet so that there's not a 1.5 feet or 2 feet to the south side of the ramp, so that it's flush with the end of the front of the terrace.
Right.
there is a window well, or two windows wells, on the north side of the church, so I'd have to double check how far they protrude. That might have been another factor.
From the drawing I'm looking at, it looks like there are hydrangeas placed in the spot I'm talking about.
I think that is a possibility. We would eliminate, another thing for having the extra width is that if they wanted to put a bench as a receiving end at the opposite end of the terrace, 4 feet wouldn't be wide enough, so it's just a little more welcoming.
I'm sorry, but I'm not following 100%. Is there any way to get Joe?
It's instead of having the ramp kind of center onto the terrace, move it south. So then,
That way?
Yeah. So then it's like flush with that part.
Does that get us very far? I guess. I mean, we
You
can't.
could keep the front side, the north side buffer from the ramp for turning and eliminate 1.5 or 2 feet of intrusion into the variance requested.
Well, the landing at the top of a ramp needs to have a 5-foot diameter circle. So that's basically
So you can take
the-
a foot off the front of the
That's
ramp.
basically like
Or the landing either way.
Code-wise for ADA, that would be like your, right?
Your minimum, yes.
Yeah. That would be like your minimum in terms of ADA. So the question, I'm a little bit at a loss in terms of the casket thing, because that's something I certainly don't do every day, so I'm not sure. I mean, the closest thing I'm trying to equate it to is a stretcher.
Or like an operating table or something like that, or a gurney or something
Like a
that,
stretcher
right?
going into an elevator in
Right.
the dimensions that they need, because that's the closest thing I can
Right.
think of.
Well,
How do you handle
also, you
caskets
have to
now?
consider pallbearers too. I mean, it's not actually equivalent to a gurney, because a gurney can be pushed and pulled, and
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around it, and that's like the closest thing I
Right.
have
I mean,
to kind of consider in terms of.
I think it's a lot of width. You need a lot of width to.
Well, once you get people on either side.
Right, exactly.
I was
Which
at a
is-
funeral in the last week and a half, and there's four of us on either side of the casket, and it was very cumbersome trying to navigate our way up the ramp and make the turn through the door. You know, even once we got to the railings, we all had to kind of turn sideways to make it, so it was very cumbersome. And it's not like a gurney where you're standing on one end pushing it. You do have people on either side.
Yeah.
How does the church handle caskets now?
We have to remove the railing, and it's carried up the steps.
And is the new design, does that plan for a removable railing as well, or is there just no railing?
The railing is right up against the doors currently. If we had a railing, and I don't believe we need a railing on these steps, but the assumption is that they would use the ramp, and there isn't a railing that's going to,
Or they could just walk up the steps?
or they could walk up the steps.
I could add to that, the reason there is a central railing, it's part of the, I think the dilemma of being in a landmark building. They have two limestone light fixtures that prevent them from putting a railing down either side, because it makes it too narrow, so that's why they have the central railing in the middle.
On the existing steps, which is why it's
Existing
not,
building,
which is why
yes.
it's not necessary
In the new
in the
one.
proposed,
In the
because
proposed.
you're away from those light fixtures, which allows you to
They
put
have two
the
side
handrail where it
railings.
belongs.
Mhm, on the sides, yes.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak with us regarding this case at this point? Just for the record, noting that there are none. I don't know that I see dimensions on this exact plan, but I think that we could certainly apply something as part of a condition related to the interior dimension of what that terrace is, and then and staff could go from there. But I'm not sure exactly what the number would come out to be, but if I see 6 feet as not unreasonable, given the scope of, in terms of depth, in terms of the scope of things that needs to happen trying to get up and maneuver around on there, but
But for me, the issue is the minimal change necessary, and there are alternative designs. There are alternative designs that are less intrusive that accomplish the same thing.
Are we discussing? We've kind of been discussing the whole way. I haven't said anything yet because I was waiting for discussion.
I'm fine with discussing without closing the record, so go ahead and discuss away, because I'd rather not reopen the record.
Right.
so.
Speaking to that, like the minimal change, a couple of things about this proposal that I think are pretty powerful arguments in favor. Number one, not separating the handicapped entrance, keeping it the same. And number two, having that space as a small outdoor space for people to congregate upon leaving the sanctuary that, like she says, the narthex is small.
But they have a front lawn for that.
People in wheelchairs can't really just cruise around on front lawns.
They'll have a ramp to go down.
Once they're down, it's not that easy to just get around on a lawn. Like the terrace is going to make the whole experience for them more accessible and put them a little bit more on and pardon, this is a terrible, I don't even mean it to be a pun, but more on an equal footing with the other congregants. And I think that's a very powerful argument. The other thing that, now I'm lost my train of thought on the third thing. Anyway, that's okay. Minimal change. I think we've talked about this before, and our previous chair had an excellent explanation for it at one point. When we talk about minimal, we shouldn't necessarily think about inches and feet, if that makes sense. Like minimal change, if we think that it's reasonable and prudent for the applicant to have a small space where the caskets can be turned and the wheelchairs can maneuver and people in wheelchairs can freely mingle with people that aren't in wheelchairs without feeling cramped and closed in and all of that. I don't think we need to say, oh, it needs to be 16 inches smaller, and then it's okay.
What if it was 5 feet even wider? Would you still be okay with it?
I mean, it's a subjective decision-making
I
process,
agree.
absolutely.
I agree.
Fair enough. So your minimal is smaller than my minimal, apparently.
I mean, I'm hearing if ADA compliance requires 5 feet, it looks to me from the drawing and the representations about how deep the drawing is that it can be narrowed and accomplish the same thing.
Then you've created an entrance, and you no longer have that gathering area. And I guess my point, what I'm saying is, I feel like having that small gathering area is a reasonable request.
What if it was not a church? What if a resident came in and said, I'd like to have a 7-foot wide gathering area porch in front of my house?
The church, I'm sure, has a lot more people that sort of reside in it every Sunday than any single residential house, so I wouldn't have a problem in differentiating between the two requests.
In a stunning turn of events here, I actually agree with Beth on nearly everything.
I'm going to follow.
A stunning turn of events.
It's not that stunning that you're in disagreement with me.
That's true as well.
Yeah,
Because we all know that I am the hawk of minimal change necessary. But again, like, to reiterate Beth's point, I see a couple of things here. One is it's not a single family. This is about more people. And so there's sort of a larger issue at hand here. Again, I also find the casket, I know that they can just keep walking up the stairs now, but it's going to be safer for all involved if they take it up the ramp. And the functional aspect of that, to me, is a good thing. And thirdly, this porch is so low, it's 30 inches off the ground. They're not putting a roof on it, and they can't enclose it in the future and make it inside space, which is my primary reason for hating all porches, because that eventually happens, and I see it as a land grab. I don't see this as a land grab, so that's personally where I'm at on this.
and I too am usually a really huge minimum change person as well, and that's why I do think that the general location is the kind of the minimum change in a not only. I think the general location, in terms of talking about location, I think the general location is kind of the minimum change, more from like an impact point than from like a technical number, from like a technical numbers point. I think the impact of the location is the most minimal, just because, in a weird way, going to the west is almost, is as close as you can get to going to the inside corner of, and the least frontage point of the church. So I think Maple has much more open presence. So from that point, I think it's, I think of it a lot that way. I would maybe suggest, as one point, though, because we don't have dimensions on this drawing, that
Yeah, I agree.
that I think we should consider what that inside dimension should, minimally be, and have that as a condition point, and if that means, and I think that might actually increase the setback a little bit if we start talking about 6 feet or so. I think this might be a little bit bigger than 6 feet, at least to scale on this drawing. And that's not to say that the architect hasn't changed it since then, so it's hard to say. But since we've been talking about that inside dimension, it seems like that's something that we should consider in a motion regardless. Any other discussion that we think will impact the applicant before I close the record?
Are we determining width, or are we only determining depth? Because the way that it appears to me from the plan is that the width is to match the existing width of the front entry.
Right.
The width doesn't require a setback, though.
Okay. So it is just the depth then that
I think so.
that your concerns about? Okay.
Technically, any condition could be
Right.
applied, but yeah. Anything else from the applicant before we close the record?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we sort of had a fair amount of our deliberations already, which I thought was good in open record because it sounded like we could end up with some questions, but we didn't, so all's good. Any other discussion before we go through? I'm going to march through here because it does seem like we have various levels of opinion. So we're going to march through the standards for a major variation. Again, we are considering only one variance in this case, which is...
Let me ask one other, sorry, as long as we're still in discussion. What if it was like a movie theater? And the movie theater decided it wanted to have a big front terrace where people could hang out after the movie? So it's another sort of public gathering place. Or what if it was Northwestern University in one of its buildings?
Are we asking for personal opinions here?
Yeah, well, no,
To
I mean,
me-
I'm just
to me
sort of,
that
I'm
aspect-
hypothesizing because I think it's relevant.
To me, that aspect of the conversation is not relevant. I find that point and that aspect of the discussion irrelevant. I don't find that a relevant, just in terms of how I was making my thoughts, I didn't find that to be a relevant argument. So I didn't factor it in. To me, that is irrelevant. So I didn't factor that in. I factor in more about accessibility, the caskets, things like that are actual, very real specific uses that need to be safely accommodated. So
More of a
that's
functional issue.
my considerations are functional purely.
So you've got the architect's view, and I'll give you the urban planner's view. I would certainly give more weight to requests from entities such as a school, a church, that sort of function as cultural and community lodestones. So I think it's in Evanston's best interest to provide support for those particular locales, those specific locations, and I think that strengthens the community in general. So I'd give more
I don't
credence
disagree
to
at
a
all.
university or a
And
church.
I think the project to make the front of the church ADA accessible is a great project and should take place. But I think that it's been over-designed in terms of the encroachment, and that the same thing can be accomplished with a less invasive design.
Fair enough.
I mean, I definitely think you have to look at, each, would I give it any more credence because it's a church? No, but because, you do drive by churches on Sunday, and you do see people gathering on the front steps. You don't see them gathering in the lawn or in the back area of the church. They do typically gather and greet and say goodbye to each other and so on the front stairs. So, I mean, that is, in the context of a church, that's typically what that area is used for. So, in that respect, I do understand why they would need that area to be larger than it is currently. And would I look at it differently than I would a single family, or I look at each project as it is in that zoning area. So I think I would, in that aspect, I would look at it differently than a movie theater or a single family home, because they're used in different ways and they're zoned differently. But I would, because it's a church, for my beliefs or non-beliefs, I wouldn't look at it any differently.
We go with discussion. Okay. Standard number 1, the requested variation will not have a substantial adverse impact on the use, enjoyment, or property values of adjoining property. We've had a lot of discussion about all these issues. In this particular case, I do not believe it will have a substantial adverse impact on the use or enjoyment of surrounding properties. It's a fair distance. As the applicant said, a whole lot width between the construction and the next property over, which is also quite a bit set back as well. So it's not even the other structure is not even in line here, and it's also located as minimally as possible out of the way of passersby and their safe travel as well. So I believe the standard has been met.
Agree.
Standard number 2, the requested variation is in keeping with the intent of the zoning ordinance. Believe that this standard has been met. Certainly, while we do respect the tenets of the zoning ordinance, it is also an intention to provide accessible and safe entrance into all the buildings in the area. So I believe this standard has been met as well.
I agree.
Agreed. Standard number 3, the alleged hardship or practical difficulty is peculiar to the property as a public facility. It is important to provide accessible entrance, and as well as a church, it's important to provide safe ingress and egress for the various functions that occur in that area. So I believe this standard has been met as well.
Agreed.
Standard number 4, the property owner would suffer a particular hardship or practical difficulty as distinguished from a mere inconvenience if the strict letter of the regulations were to be carried out. With respect to the strict letter of the regulations, the existing property would not be able to have any ramp addition pretty much on any side of the building without it requiring a variance. So if the strict letter of the regulations were carried out, they would not be able to provide accessible entrance to their sanctuary. So this would be a particular hardship or practical difficulty. So I believe this standard has been met as well.
Agreed.
Standard number 5, the purpose of the variation is not based exclusively upon a desire to extract additional income from the property. I presume that The church is a not-for-profit, and regardless, I do not believe that this will have a vast impact on the property value, nor do I believe that they expect to extract additional income from this addition. So I believe the standard has been met.
Agreed.
Standard number 6, the alleged difficulty or hardship has not been created by any person having an interest in the property. I don't know the exact age of the church, but it's been there for a while, I'm quite certain. And I do not believe that anyone currently involved in the project has had any impact on that, and certainly not had any general impact on the requirements to certainly provide accessible entrance as much as possible. So I believe this standard has been met.
Agreed.
Standard number 7, the requested variation is limited to the minimum change necessary to alleviate the particular hardship or practical difficulty which affects the property. We've certainly had quite a bit of discussion about this point with varying opinions, but for my part, I believe that the location that has been chosen, given the fact that I actually walk past this property 5 days a week, is probably the most minimal location, most minimal change in terms of location and impact to the surrounding area. I do believe that, given some of our discussion about distance, that if we do put a reasonable limitation on the interior depth of that terrace, that it will meet the minimum change necessary, because we do need a certain level of safety in terms of both accessible access and in terms of the sheer numbers of people that could be trying to maneuver caskets on that terrace. So I believe this standard has been met as well.
I think unless you talk about the conditions that you would impose, then it's hard to consider that statement in the abstract.
Okay. Well, then let's talk about that. Do we want to say, we've talked about 6 feet a lot, so do we want to say that that dimension, the interior dimension of the terrace is 6 feet?
I think 6 is reasonable.
I'd propose 5, which is the number you quoted for ADA compliance.
When you're talking ADA, you're just talking about being able to maneuver a wheelchair, only not a casket, so that's minimal for a wheelchair.
Correct. That's minimal. That's code minimum for a wheelchair,
so
but that does not reflect
For a
casket.
passageway or a hallway or a entrance, is that the 5 feet? What?
the fact that there's there has to be that is the dimension for the landing at the top or the bottom of a ramp.
It has to be at least that.
That is a minimum dimension, yes.
For me, if it's set at what the regulation requires and can be designed that way to serve this function, then it's the minimal change necessary.
But we're quoting a function for a wheelchair, right? Not a casket.
Correct. I know of no such code related to caskets, so.
And a big reason for this change is not only for ADA, but is also to.
Correct, and that's why I consider a little bit more leeway, because I imagine that most caskets are at least 6 feet long. I presume most of them are longer.
If you're talking about wheeling a casket up the ramp, I mean, if you look at the drawing, there's not a label on it, but if you look at this drawing, assuming that it's drawn to scale or something like it, if you wheel the casket up the ramp, there's plenty of room to wheel it to the center of the landing and turn it into the doorway. It doesn't need to be another foot or 2 feet in the front of the ramp. Or the casket can be carried right up the front steps, which no longer have a railing.
You know, the funeral I was at, they didn't even carry the casket. It's on like a dolly and it's pushed. So, I mean, you're not going upstairs.
Yeah, they don't carry too often anymore unless they have to.
Wheel it up so it goes up the ramp typically.
I don't know that we're going to find, I don't know, are we going to find a happy medium on this?
I don't know that we are.
I think
Okay.
I think you're probably going to be okay at 6.
All right, I don't know that we're going to find a happy medium on this, but I guess, in my consideration of that and my comment on number 7, I have the 6-foot number in mind for the interior dimension of the terrace.
What is it designed at right now? We don't know.
I don't know.
The architect said about 6 feet.
I don't know.
Is that from the front of the door to the to the end of the terrace, or is that from
That's
where?
that's from the side to side of the ramp.
It's
So as you're looking, the ramp as it comes up is 4 feet, and then it's a foot on either side of the ramp.
yeah. To scale, this looks like maybe it's a little bit more than that right now,
It
but
looks like it might be closer to 7 or 8.
but we're saying, since there's no dimensions, we're saying that will be 6 feet, and whatever, if that makes the setback, if even more, then great.
Yes.
So I guess with respect to number 7, my comments were in consideration of the 6-foot dimension that had been discussed, and I certainly accept anybody else's thoughts in terms of whether or not they agree based on the 6 feet, or they think another, whatever else anybody else wants to add to those standards.
I mean, I'm back to I'd leave it as drawn. Maybe it is a little bit bigger. I'm back to the whole thing of, okay, if the ADA, it's 5 for the wheelchair to get up there. You're still talking about if you're going to have people standing around, you don't want everybody on top of somebody on a wheelchair. What if there's 2 wheelchairs? I mean, I feel like giving them a little bit of space to maneuver and breathe and be standing up there or wheeling up there with other people, I think that's a valid argument enough for me I'm not going to necessarily say that 6 feet is.
There are no dimensions.
Right, I know this, I know, I know it's kind of tough. 6 feet seems a little narrow to me, personally.
But I think that's what the landscape architect said. So don't we get to take,
All right, we'll take them at their word, sure.
well,
All right.
Either way,
have
I
an
disagree.
option?
I disagree that the standard is
I guess
met.
any other comments specifically related to standard number 7?
None for
that
me.
out. Okay. We've run through the standards and had quite a bit of discussion. Is there a motion regarding this matter?
Sure. Where's my case number? I move that in the case of ZBA 12ZMJV-0049, that we grant the major variance of a front yard setback of 14 and a half feet where 24.3 feet is required, zoning code section 6419B1, with the condition that the interior terrace dimension is
depth.
is 6 feet. Is that what we wanted to do?
Well, just to if I can clarify that would mean that
Which might change the actual
Right. So the
dimension of the setback.
based on the current design, but with the interior dimension not exceeding 6 feet. So I don't know how you want to say that, but Melissa, how do you feel comfortable with this in terms of? I think you get the gist of what we're trying to say. I'm just trying to figure out legally how you feel most comfortable with that being worded. Should we?
Because we can't actually give a
Should we say
precise setback.
not to exceed the 14-foot whatever, but based on,
That would be fine.
okay. Did you understand that? So we would be.
I would amend the movement to say what Chairman Summers is about to say.
Not to put words in your mouth, so I'll let you
Please.
confirm that I'm saying something correctly, but that it would be not to a setback not to be less than 14 and a half feet, except that the interior dimension of the terrace shall not exceed 6 feet, and the final construction will be in conformance with whichever of the lesser creates, with whichever dimension creates the lesser
Encroachment.
The lesser encroachment, thank you.
I agree to that amendment.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
And the motion is carried 4-1. Ouch. I hope, was that clear to you guys, what that motion was?
We were talking. You're telling us we have to redesign our.
Minimally.
Well, it's not clear to us because there aren't dimensions on this plan, so we're not necessarily saying that. We're saying we can't really tell because of what the dimensions are on here. So if it is 6 feet, if it's 6 feet, then this stands. If it's not 6 feet, if it's
9.
whatever it is, then this would just shrink in to be 6 feet. I don't expect it'll be drastically different. It'll be more or less the same plan. It's just,
The dimension change.
we're just, without dimensions on the plan, we're trying to
Clarify.
it so that it's clear what the intention is. So I suspect that the design will be either exactly the same or substantially similar. I wouldn't think that you would notice all that much, but I guess that's where we stand. So, and certainly that can be clarified with staff. Anything else for this evening? With that, we will be adjourned.
All right. Okay. See ya.
Thanks.
Scott, thank you for that email. Oh, you're welcome. For the